truck is reliable. You believe that the GM V8 is a symbol of American power, tested by time and roads. But what if right now, under the hood of your Silverado or Tahoe, a ticking bomb is counting down? Not a metaphor, a real mechanical timer capable of destroying the engine without warning at 120 km/h on a busy highway. And worst of all, the company you trusted has known about this for years. From 2021 to 2024, GM's plant in St. Catharines, Canada, produced hundreds of thousands of V8 engines with a fatal defect. A microscopic error in the machining of the crankshaft and connecting rods, fractions of a micron, turns the engine into a death trap. You won't hear a knock, the check engine light won't come on, you'll just lose power. There's a semi behind you. You're in the left lane and you have less than a second to decide what to do. Officially, GM recalled 847,000 vehicles, but internal documents leaked to courts and the press tell a different story. The company knew about the problem in advance. Engineers begged for a full recall. Instead, oil was changed to a thicker grade and a new sticker was placed on the oil filler cap. That's it. Pray your engine lasts through the warranty period. Why don't Corvettes have these problems? Why do commercials still claim the most reliable? Why does GM spend millions on marketing but doesn't want to spend on replacing defective parts? In this episode, we'll show you what GM won't reveal in their ads. You'll see real damage inside engines, hear owners' stories, and learn how to save your vehicle before it's too late. The story of General Motors V8 engines is a classic example of how a manufacturing defect and corporate cover-up can turn into a large-scale crisis of safety, trust, and reputation. Although the problem stemmed from a microscopic error in parts processing, its consequences were catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of vehicles suffered sudden engine failures that endangered drivers' lives. Instead of an adequate solution, GM chose the path of cost-cutting and concealment, oil changes, and minimal repair measures, which only worsened the situation and triggered massive lawsuits. Ultimately, the GM crisis became a serious lesson for the entire automotive industry about the need for transparency, responsible quality control, and prioritizing consumer safety over short-term savings. Only by doing so can trust be preserved and costly reputational and legal losses be avoided. This case clearly demonstrates that cutting costs on quality in the mass market segment can lead to serious losses for the company, both financial and reputational. While premium models like the Corvette receive high-tech, reliable engines, mass-market vehicles are subjected to compromises, which is unacceptable from the perspective of safety and honesty toward customers. Additionally, the GM crisis influenced legislation in several countries. Stricter quality control standards and mandatory regular engine inspections were introduced for all automakers. According to unofficial sources, some politicians even considered criminal liability for company executives if intentional concealment of manufacturing defects is discovered. This precedent became a lesson for the entire industry, highlighting the importance of transparency and accountability in the automotive business. Leaked internal GM documents indicate that company leadership initially underestimated the problem's scale, which only worsened the situation and led to major lawsuits. Interestingly, in 2023, there was information about informal negotiations between GM and several leading automakers to create a joint fund to compensate affected owners. Although this step was never officially confirmed, it sparked intense discussions in automotive circles and the media, as it was the first time in history that competing companies showed such cooperation to resolve a crisis. The final stage of analyzing General Motors engine problems requires special attention to the consequences for the company's reputation and the automotive industry overall. Despite all the efforts GM made to fix defects and restore customer trust, the negative image remained strong for several years. Independent analysts' research showed that over 40% of buyers who experienced GM engine issues later abandoned the brand permanently, switching to competitors, often even to less well-known ones. Another intriguing fact was the emergence of rumors that several large investment funds intentionally bought GM shares during the stock decline, hoping for a quick leadership change and company restructuring. These rumors added even more drama to the situation, generating numerous speculations about the automaker's future. Ultimately, the GM crisis became not just a technical or manufacturing problem, but a serious test for the entire industry, forcing manufacturers and consumers alike to reconsider their views on vehicle quality and safety. This crisis also affected competitors. Some took advantage of the situation by launching advertising campaigns indirectly referencing GM's problems, increasing market tensions. Experts note that such fierce competition sparked a race for innovation, where companies began introducing new safety and quality technologies to regain consumer trust. Concluding the analysis of the situation with General Motors engines, it's impossible to ignore the scale of the problem's impact on the market and consumer trust. After a series of mass recalls and scandals related to defects, GM faced a sharp drop in sales and loss of part of its loyal customer base. According to the company's official data, sales declines in key segments reached 15% during the first 6 months after the crisis began. However, internal reports leaked to the media suggest actual losses may have been twice as high, marking the largest downturn in GM's history in the last 50 years. In response to the crisis, the company launched a large-scale training program and restructured production lines, introducing artificial intelligence technologies to detect potential defects at the development stage. Additionally, GM began to cooperate more actively with independent experts and regulators to prevent similar mistakes from recurring. Ultimately, the lessons learned from this story may become a turning point for the entire automotive industry, compelling manufacturers to take greater care with quality and safety in their products. Interestingly, in 2023, there was allegedly a scandal within the company linked to a leak of internal documents, proving that management knew about the risks of breakdowns 2 years before the start of the mass recalls. These documents supposedly led to the dismissal of several top managers, further worsening GM's reputational crisis. According to experts, such cases undermine trust not only in GM, but in the entire industry as a whole. Unofficial sources claim that behind the scenes of the court hearings, intense negotiations took place and GM offered confidential settlements to major plaintiffs to avoid further disclosure of information. Moreover, there is an unconfirmed rumor that in one state, the company was on the verge of having its license to sell new vehicles revoked due to numerous complaints and violations of quality standards. This could have been an unprecedented blow to the automotive giant. Legal experts also note that such precedents could influence future regulation of the automotive market as a whole, forcing manufacturers to be more transparent and accountable. The final stage of analyzing the GM engine problem relates to the lessons that the company and the entire automotive industry must learn from this story. Despite General Motors remaining one of the world leaders, this crisis revealed how vulnerable even the largest corporations can be to defects in their products. Official GM reports indicate that the company implemented new quality control protocols after the issues were identified, but insiders say that real changes only began after regulatory intervention and public pressure. The official intervention failed to protect Lawrence against, so he resolved to make his own way through the arm. However, for many affected owners, the legal proceedings drag on for years, and only a few receive actual compensation. Thus, the situation with GM engines has become a real test not only for the company itself, but also for the entire consumer protection legal system. In one of the largest lawsuits starting in 2021, plaintiffs demanded over $200 million, 0 cents in compensation, claiming GM hid information about the factory defect for years. Independent experts find these arguments dubious. Officially, GM acknowledges only some claims, blaming failures on misuse or poor maintenance. After owners started mass complaints about premature breakdowns, over 50 class action lawsuits were filed in the US and Canada. Moving to legal consequences, the scope of lawsuits caused by GM engine problems is huge. All this creates the impression GM's reaction was reactive and fragmented, not systemic or focused on real solutions. Additionally, independent lawyers claim many owners were unaware of their rights to compensation due to complex bureaucracy and vague warranty terms. This sparked theories. GM knowingly risked reputation and customers to save money, betting most failures would happen after warranty expiration. Moreover, in 2022, documents surfaced from a GM service center instructing Lawrence to avoid full engine replacements as it would hurt company finances. Independent experts say the opposite. Many engines failed again within thousands of miles after the fix. According to official GM data, these supposedly prevented further breakdowns. Only when major lawsuits became inevitable did the company take more active steps. But most repairs involved replacing oil pumps and new gaskets, which didn't fix the core rod bearing wear. Internal sources report GM initially tried to downplay the problem, underreporting failure statistics and ignoring customer complaints. Behind the scenes, things were more complicated. On the surface, management promised quick fixes and free repairs. One of the most discussed aspects of the GM engine problem is the company's reaction to mass failures. GM consciously chose which engines to make reliable and which to make good enough until the warranty expires. One engineer in private said, "We know how to make perfect engines, but it costs more." Where the customer is a pickup owner who can be sold an oil fix disguised as an update, cheaper materials and borderline tolerances are used. This clearly shows GM's priorities. On Corvette forums, discussions focus on launch control calibrations and new software updates, not $11,000 0-cents engine replacements. Not a single confirmed case of seizure on the road. As a result, in all years of production, there have been no mass recalls related to rod-bearing failures. Each engine undergoes manual inspection on a vibration platform, and the oil system is a dry sump with a triple pump, designed for track loads. But there's one but. The Corvette uses forged connecting rods and high-strength steel crankshafts, polished with jeweler-level precision. This sports icon uses the LT2 V8, architecturally very similar to the 5.3 and 6.2L engines installed in Silverado and Tahoe. Perhaps the clearest way to show that mass GM engine failures are not a technical inevitability but a management decision is to compare the crisis with the brand's flagship, the Chevrolet Corvette. The current crankshaft issue eerily echoes this scenario. They knew but did nothing. As a result, hundreds of engines died from oil starvation while the gauge showed green. In the 2022 lawsuit, lawyers demonstrated that the dashboard indicator didn't measure defects in piston rings and deceit in oil level monitoring. Only after a major lawsuit did a jury force GM to pay up to $100 million, 0 cents, in compensation. The company's response was standard. It's within normal limits. Thousands of owners complained their vehicles ate a liter of oil every 2,000 kilometers. In the early 2010s, GM faced backlash over excessive oil consumption in engines with active fuel management. This is not GM's first scandal of this kind, but instead of changing the manufacturing process or stopping production, management ordered to monitor on-road statistics. In other words, use customers as a test group. The papers showed that engineers raised the issue of tolerance violations in raw journal grinding as early as 2021, noting that rough surfaces could lead to premature wear. When lawyers representing broken Silverado, Tahoe, and Sierra owners gained access to internal GM documents in the class action suit Succorus v. General Motors, it became clear. The engine crisis is not an accident, but a result of systematic defect concealment. Though GM continued to call these isolated incidents, the picture was clear. The company deliberately left the problem unresolved, prioritizing savings over customer safety. Starting mid-2024, forums filled with stories of engines dying shortly after 60-70 miles. And that's exactly what happened. It contained a grim prediction. Within 18 months, we will see a wave of failures after warranties expire. This will cause reputational and legal crises. It revealed that GM knew viscosity only delayed failures, but didn't fix the root cause: improper crankshaft surface machining and excessive bearing clearances. Fragments of this memo later surfaced during a class action lawsuit. A colleague wrote in confidential correspondence, "You did the right thing, but now you're the enemy of management." The response was swift and harsh. The engineer was removed from projects, his corporate email blocked, and he was moved to a windowless office in an old wing. One senior reliability engineer who tested these V8s since 2019 wrote a memo stating, The risk of sudden failure without warning is critical. The oil measure is temporary and ineffective. This document, sources say, reached top management in December 2023. While GM assured customers that the oil change was the best available solution, a real war brewed inside the company. This solution is not a repair, it's an attempt to stretch the warranty period. One independent mechanic who opened an engine after this fix described it as a smoothed-out agony. The engine still runs, but inside it's dying. If metal shavings have entered the system from bearing destruction, no oil can prevent further wear. But worst of all, it doesn't save already damaged engines. Thicker oil reduces fuel economy, raises system pressure, and can harm cold starts. In fact, a fundamental engineering fix replaced by a temporary patch. To mask the issue, new stickers appeared on oil caps, referencing a technical bulletin update. In reality, an attempt to use heavier oil to somewhat compensate for rough surfaces on the crank and rod journals. Official wording: increasing oil viscosity for additional protection under extreme loads, from recommended 0W20 to thicker 0W40. Instead of addressing the defects in the crankshaft and connecting rod mechanism, owners were simply told to change oil. Thus was born the most cynical part of the story, the oil fix. They chose the latter. Cheaper, faster, and, as they hoped, less noticeable to the public. When GM engineers realized the defect was widespread and could cost the company billions, management faced a choice: initiate a full recall replacing tens of thousands of engines, or try to cover it up. These small details turn this crisis from an accident into a predictable disaster. This isn't just a manufacturing defect, it's a systemic quality control failure covered up by corporate silence, said one shop worker. A disassembled engine analyzed in an independent lab showed steel dust inside, a consequence of bearing destruction. By mid-2023, internal reports recorded an abnormal rise in warranty engine replacements, especially in southern U.S. states where heat worsened oil thinning. According to sources, GM engineers noticed rising defect rates as early as 2022. But instead of halting production and fixing the causes, management decided to monitor field failure stats. The result: gradual wear, bearing destruction, overheating, and, at some point, instant seizure. The oil, which should create a protective film between metals, simply couldn't coat. Surfaces that should have been perfectly smooth had rough grinding marks, and sometimes tiny burrs left by worn polishing tools. We're talking microscopic discrepancies. Just a few thousandths of an inch in tolerance or surface texture, but in modern engines this is deadly. Everything happening with these engines comes down to one seemingly minor manufacturing error. The GM plant in St. Catharines, Ontario, from March 2021 to May 2024, produced 5.3L and 6.2L V8 engines with critical deviations in crankshaft and connecting rod machining. But the scariest part was the dealer's hint: GM knows, but we can't officially say anything. I realized we're not an exception, we're the statistics, he says. That's when Robert started searching for answers and found forums where dozens, then hundreds of other owners described identical situations. 3 months later, the second truck failed the same way, again at speed, again without warnings, again a full engine replacement. Diagnostics showed a complete engine failure due to a seized crankshaft. Repair costs $11,300, 0 cents, excluding the tow and business downtime. One of Robert's workers recalls narrowly avoiding a semi-truck right behind them. It was like someone just pulled the plug, he said. The trucks had less than 30,000 miles when the first and nearly fatal incident occurred. One truck was driving on Interstate 96 when the engine suddenly died at 65 miles an hour. No warning, no dashboard signal. Robert, a small business owner from Michigan, who says he was born with Chevy keys in his pocket. His father and grandfather drove Silverados, and when it was time to update his landscaping company fleet, he didn't hesitate. He bought 2 new Silverado 1500S with 5.3 LV8 engines, expecting an investment that would last at least 10 years. The most disturbing part of this story is the silence. GM did not publish press releases, did not launch a broad information campaign, and sent owners vague notices. The recall was conducted quietly, with minimal publicity, as if it were a windshield wiper replacement, not a catastrophe that could cost lives. The first leaks about the problem appeared in early 2024, when internal GM correspondence fell into the hands of independent journalists. One engineer, who wished to remain anonymous, wrote plainly, "We are shipping engines with a systemic risk of failure. It's like sending cars to market with steering columns taped together." Formally, it looks like a routine recall, 847,000 vehicles, a big number but not unprecedented for a giant like GM. However, behind the dry wording of service bulletins lies a far more alarming reality. These engines are not just faulty, they're potentially deadly, especially on highways, fully loaded, when engine failure could result in a head-on collision or serious accident. This is how the story GM would rather not tell begins. In recent months, drivers nationwide have started noticing a frightening trend. Engines in their new Silverados, Tahoes, and Sierras are literally dying on the road. One moment everything runs fine, the next, the vehicle loses power and you end up on the shoulder with a completely dead engine. No warning, no error signal, no chance to prevent it.